Good evening and welcome to Exegete This, a UK Christian podcast. And this week we are going to be looking at the question, the big news of the week, should Boris resign? Partygate has been brewing and rambling on. Boris Johnson has been partying away whilst we've all been locked down, and a number of MPs have handed in letters of no confidence. Should Boris resign?
Can I just jump in right at the start and say my main issue with this is one of the words you just mentioned, which is the sticking on of the word gate after everything.
Any controversy.
Because this goes back to Watergate.
Yeah.
Which wasn't a problem with water.
I didn't
Watergate was the name of the hotel.
Oh, right.
And so why have they just just stop putting gate on everything? Because it just does my head in. it's like the problem with Nixon was that it was the phone calls, not with water. So, like, if you say, "Oh, what was Nixon?" Oh, it was Watergate. Oh, what did he do?
I thought
water?
It was. I'm totally confused as to where that came from. Then.
Yeah, well, that's where it came from. When it's done.
I thought it was waterboarding.
No.
Nothing to do with waterboarding.
No, not that I know of. No, I'm pretty sure it was the Nixon downfall. In
America. I have no idea.
Yeah, because we even had Gate a while ago, a few years ago about the. So yeah. Anyway, that annoys me.
That was news to me.
Yeah, but yes, people want Boris Johnson to resign. I hear. Do you have an opinion on it?
We want integrity in our leaders. That seems to be where it's coming from. Ian Blackford in the House of Commons said he unintentionally told us that he didn't have a party or something to that effect, which was quite funny in the context. He unintentionally told us that he did this, and he got kicked out of the House of Commons for the session, I think, on that occasion for refusing to retract the misled Parliament stuff. I'm no fan of the SNP, but it was quite an amusing.
But they can be funny.
They can be funny, and they can say some things that are true and amusing, and he refused to back down. So fair enough. Do I have an opinion? Like I say, we want integrity in our leaders, in our MPs, all of them.
Yeah.
He seems to be certainly struggling to hold the command of people and the respect of his party. Normally, yes, I would probably say he should resign, but there's just something about this. The timing, obviously these people knew about these parties they've chosen to release it now when he's sort of ending lockdown restrictions and easing off, and that tends to make me think it's a little bit of that back and forth I was talking about last time, when I wasn't sure whether he's holding back certain people who want to do more and whether they're now sort of getting back at him. I just think the whole thing's a mess. It's a bit dirty. We knew, he moved into number 10 with a woman who wasn't his wife, who he had children to. So if you're looking for an upstanding moral character, that's not what you were getting in the first place. So he had I'm sure they had some work to discuss, but I don't know the full ins and outs. But I just think there are probably worse people that will take his place. It's difficult to say. What about you? Do you have any?
I don't have any particular opinions on it. Really.
Why are we talking about this?
Well, because you do.
We don't have.
I have the general opinion that calling for someone's resignation is usually a bit of a cheap shot. It's done very quickly, and it's usually done for the benefit of those who are not in power. If that makes sense, not even for the benefit of the country or for the party as a whole. It's usually done because they want someone else to replace them, or they want to advance their own pet cause. And so I'm generally sceptical of calls to resign.
There are definitely people that are on that integrity thing now, aren't there?
Yes.
The ones we like.
Well, yeah. The problem is, I struggle when they seem to pick and choose what things are matters of integrity. And so suddenly this is a matter of integrity when loads of other things haven't been up to now.
Yeah. So I think one of the big ones is allegedly, apparently, unintentionally or intentionally misleading the House, lying to the collective MPs about what is going on, what is or isn't happening. It's that direct sort of, I guess, that relationship between MPs and Prime Minister.
Yeah, I can understand there might be a functional reason for him to step down, because if you cannot lead a government, then you can't command the House. So, at some point, there's enough distrust or anger that if it doesn't work, you sort of have to step down because you can't do anything. There might well be a functional reason for him to step down in that sense. But again, the whole thing, I think, like you said, it just seems a bit odd. The timing, because like the people who were at the parties knew it was wrong then, and if they knew it was like, where's the integrity for any of the people who were there? Is it only a problem when you lie to the House? It's not a problem when you're keeping it deliberately secret. It's that kind of thing. They're not a higher moral standard just because they're collectively sitting in the chamber. It's all that sort of stuff that bothers me. And the other week I kept saying, it's all politics. Of course it's politics, they're politicians, but what I meant is it's party politics. It's internal divisions and the advance of a particular cause. And because there is no other cause in there that I could even hope to back, I can't get excited about the change of leader. That's the other thing. So,
one thing you've said to me over the last sort of few years was really what you want is for the Conservative Party to die so that we can actually have a real Conservative Party again, a proper Conservative Party, rather than these con-socialists.
Yeah, they're just Blairites a few steps behind the Labour Party.
Or ahead sometimes.
Well, yeah, that's true.
What do you think would bring that about faster, him staying or going?
I actually don't think it's possible.
You don't think it's possible?
At the moment, no. I don't think there are enough Conservatives, with a small c, in the country, let alone in that kind of, in politics, in order. So say there was a complete collapse of both parties and somehow you managed to scrabble two new parties together without using the old class lines and things like that. I don't think you would end up with a party that I could easily get on board with.
Yeah.
And so, because the problem is people aren't conservative about the things I care about. Morals, laws, limits. They might be conservative economically or on things like immigration, but they're things I care less about. So the things I care about, I just I can't see it. I don't think enough people believe them, and so you need to persuade people where you are.
I was going to say, you want to run for MP?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
So fairly.
I'd be happy to skip straight to benign dictator. Yeah, if I could just go straight to that stuff, I'd do that one. Yeah.
Great. So from that, we're going to go into a little bit of a history lesson.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect us to deal with modern politics in a straightforward way. So you're going to shed some light, I hope, on the general relationship between states and God and people.
Well, I'll try.
By going back, how long? To the 400 and something?
AD 451. So I'm going to talk about the Council of Chalcedon and how that is related to, what's the creation of Western societies, parliaments, and effectively, and how that sort of comes into today's situation, I guess. So the Council of Chalcedon, AD 451. I've heard it often talked about as being sort of the foundation, or at least a platform for the Western freedom and liberty and the control of governments, and it seemed very strange to me. I couldn't quite get my head around it for a while. I was reading Mission of God this week, Joe Boot's book. It seemed to explain it, which in a way that at least twigged. So the bit that's important that Chalcedon says or sets forward, obviously it doesn't create this, but we think it comes from Scripture, from places like John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That Jesus is truly God and truly man. That he is two natures in one person, and those two natures are two natures in one person without I'm going to try to remember it now, without confusion, without change, without separation or division. And again, I've sort of puzzled with this for a while as to how does this really relate to a Western? How does that produce?
It doesn't sound
liberty.
Like
how does that produce the liberty that we have
yeah.
from Western societies of liberty and freedom? And I'll do my best to explain it, but obviously feel free to do more research on this subject. But really, this is a very strong, or at least lays a strong foundation against what was all around at that time. You could, if you think 451, Islam wasn't on the scene at that time. The rest of everything, as far as I know, was pagan. It's Roman gods or Greek gods or mythology or whatever, and there were lots of gods. There are many gods in those religions, and you have these gods procreating, having children, and them sometimes coming into the earthly domain, and all sorts of weird stuff going on, and also this idea that man can become gods, or that and again is part of this whole sort of interwoven mess of stuff of this idea that man can become God. That gives rise to the sort of the pharaohs and the leaders, the great and powerful, wonderful leaders are said to be sons of the gods.
And Caesar himself.
For there is no other name under heaven by which you must be saved. Augustus Caesar, which of course Paul uses and says, there is no other name under heaven by which you must be saved, Jesus Christ. And so this statement, this truth, this biblical teaching says no, man can't become God. There's only one mediator. There's only one person. There's only one person who is able and fit to be who is fully God and fully man, and so he can represent us fully before God perfectly. Mm-hmm. We can't elevate to that position. We can't climb to that position either individually. We can't sort of transcend humanism ourselves, and we can't transcend humanism and become gods as a collective either.
And nor can we pull God down to us, because that's what you have in the gods, isn't it? So you have Zeus coming down and acting like a man by having kids with. So you've got these two fixed things that cannot bridge the gap. You've got God, who cannot come down.
Yeah,
it reduces himself to be like us, and us that cannot raise ourselves to be like him. They're fixed.
Yeah, we can't bring him down, but obviously we say God became man. Yes. He entered into human existence and human experience in time. But also Christians were the first ones to be called atheists, because they said the gods don't exist. They deny the gods. Yeah. No, all your gods, they're not real. Yeah. There was only one God. There was only Jesus Christ. There was only one God Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I was just going to say something and it just slipped from my mind. I'm like, oh, I need to say that, and I've forgotten what it was as I was saying that. We can't become God.
We can't transcend either individually or collectively.
Yeah. So that has a huge political ramification. So in a similar vein to last time when I said, if you don't think politics should stay out of the pulpit, don't get in the pulpit, because last time I said Jesus is Lord. That's a profound statement. Jesus is fully God and fully man is a politically profound statement. You cannot transcend. You can't bridge that divide. You can't be. We're not sufficient. We can't step into that role. Man can't be at the center. Man can't be in that role of, acting as a god, because again, this false mimicry needs to then mimic other things like omniscience, omnipotence. So that sort of feeds into our modern setting of the surveillance state, the government wanting more and more and more surveillance to know everything. The government needs to know everything, and then it's able to keep us safe, and then it's able to act as God. It needs to have more power. It needs to be omnipotent. Again, it's sort of mimicking God. It can't do that. It can't. Even if we give it all the power that it might ask for, it can't fill that role. It can't do that. And so this takes a long time, AD 451, up until, through the 1,000 years before, before, say, the Reformation, and then the development of Puritan thinking, which has shaped, obviously, hugely Great Britain, Canada, the US, and the liberty and freedom that those countries have enjoyed, the separation of powers, because governments can't fulfill the powers. It shouldn't be centralized in one man, and those powers, say powers of the judiciary, they shouldn't be in the state. That needs to be, the rule of law. These things need to be put in their right categories, and society built on those categories. And so I don't know if that line has been drawn from here's Chalcedon and here's how it impacts the religions of the world at the time, and then says, no, you can't have this, and it starts breaking up these powers. This obviously, this thinking that permeates the people, this Christianity as it influences particularly those Western countries, Britain, Canada, and the US, I think, are the greatest. And in the book Mission of God, Joe talks about. He just says, actually, I think Britain has the strongest Christian heritage of any nation whatsoever, and Canada, having it said sort of explicitly. So the US is probably the most Christian-ish nation around at the moment. I know it's really unmeasured, but around at the moment. But obviously, in their constitution, it doesn't mention God, whereas in our constitution, written, yes, parts. People often say we have an unwritten constitution, but there are written parts of it. Yeah. But our declarations in Parliament of just explicitly full of God, and seeking God's blessing and bowing to God's law and obeying God, and there will be blessing from that. So, like I say, he argues in the book that Great Britain and Canada are the best. I don't know the right words. Maybe the best examples of having a Christian heritage and framework, although as we've seen and discussed last week, Canada is rapidly, and has been for quite some time, this doesn't just happen overnight, what we were talking about last week, has been for some time running against God, overthrowing God in their makeup, in their setup, in their laws. And so we're seeing the results of that. We're seeing a return to paganism. The paganism that was undone. We're seeing a return to authoritarian tendencies. Like I said, that omniscience, that omnipotence that they can't have. We can make ourselves feel safer by giving them stuff, giving them authority, but you're not actually safer. It's just a false sense of safety, and then sooner or later they will, they will interfere in your lives more and more and more and more. It gives rise to welfare state and nationalised everything.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Has that line? Have I drawn that line? Have you seen a connection there?
I think I might have done. Let me try and express it this way and see if you agree with this as a summary. It's because of Jesus' uniqueness to bridge the gap, to be the mediator. He needs to be both God, truly God, and truly man. And so he's the only one who can do that.
Yeah. And so what? One thing I missed out when I said, without confusion, without separation, division, change. It means that, one of the things it means is that he's not less God because he's man.
Correct.
Because of his man nature. And he's not less man because of his God nature. Those two natures are intact fully, but also not separable. They're in one person of the one being, God. So we use some of these particular words like person and being in certain categories that have developed that language over a long time. So they're sort of important words that I'm trying to pick through.
Yeah, and it's they spent so long formulating the wording of these confessions, and we just glibly paraphrase it any way we like, which is good to understand all the thinking behind it, so you know it well enough to be able to explain it in your own words. But they would debate the difference between truly and fully.
Yeah, did I say fully?
In your first statement you said truly, which is how I learnt it.
Right.
Truly man and truly God. And so because Jesus is uniquely in that position of being truly man and truly God, that automatically, because it's a position that can only be occupied by one. There is one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. So it's a unique position. So of necessity, no government and no individual can claim that they have that position of being God or attaining to godhood or any of that sort of thing. And therefore, you didn't express it this way, but therefore you have to then accept your station as set by the one who is God, because you're under him. You can't attain to him, you can't be like him, you can't question him. And so through Jesus Christ comes the setting up of where everyone is.
Yeah. We have to interpret our experience as creatures.
Yes.
As creatures created by God.
And creatures who have a fixed realm, who cannot, like you say, transcend and become like God.
Yeah, that's it's one of the... You can start to see that through the whole Bible, really, because right from Adam and Eve,
well, I was thinking,
you'll be like God.
Yeah,
that was the temptation. You'll be like God.
Yeah. And I was thinking of, as I was speaking about Satan, that his is the same thing. I will ascend. I will. It's pride. He wants to be God in his place.
Yeah. So there's that sort of on the individual level, but then also, for example, the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
Collectively, we're building up to God. Yeah. We're going to be like God. And God's judgment comes on them to separate them. They were disobeying the command to fill the whole earth. They were just gathering in one place. So there is that desire naturally occurring to ascend to God, and with the repaganization of nation, we start to see politicians exercising more authority than they should, and it's accepted, going beyond their station, and I think and that leads into I guess what we wanted to talk about next, of politicians going beyond their station. You'd picked out some tweets from...
Yeah, so just before we jump into that, there's a... I can't remember what I was going to say, so let's just go into it.
Okay.
So I saw some tweets. Obviously, I don't use Twitter.
Right.
But someone mentioned it, so I Googled it and found it.
Uh-huh.
And these tweets are by Jeremy Hunt, who used to be the health secretary.
Right.
I don't know what he does now. Minister for Plasticine or something. And he put a series of tweets out, which to me highlights this kind of thinking.
Mm.
Oh, that's what I was going to say earlier, is that we make the mistake of thinking that if we can mimic some of the attributes of God, if you like, then we will be in a position to act like God. So the omniscience idea. Say the government could have all the knowledge. They're not in a position of character or ability to exercise judgment on that rightly.
Mm.
And so, great, you get all the information.
Who's got it?
And what do you do with it? Having the information doesn't make you fully like God. And so you can have all the information and use it to go and kill all the people you don't like.
Yeah.
So we conflate. We're not conflating. It's the limits are there for a reason. And even if you think you've attained something, then you need to be very careful in the exercise of it. And I think that's what this shows. So I'll read a few of them. And so he's talking about the decision to not make vaccines mandatory for NHS workers. So it was government policy that all NHS workers, in fact, not just the NHS, anyone who works in a regulated health industry, so it was including private as well.
Wow.
In England.
I didn't realise it was private as well.
So it doesn't affect Scotland. It didn't affect Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. It was just England, as far as I know. And because I know of doctors who were preparing to move house.
Right, okay.
So in order to keep working.
Keep their job.
Yeah, or to find a new job.
Yeah.
And so they were going to bring that in. They U-turned on it.
Praise God.
Backtracked, which we were praying for. I'm very grateful for.
Yeah.
But these tweets from Jeremy Hunt, to me, showed that... Well, I'll read the first one. He said, "I understand the practical reasons why we have abandoned mandatory vaccinations, but think the U-turn is completely wrong. Here's why." And so that's stating the only reason he thinks that they turned away from them were practical. They couldn't get it done. And if they followed it through, there would be too many practical consequences of it. He doesn't think it's a bad policy. And it's going to come on to show later that actually he thinks it's a very good policy. So, and all the way through you'll get this idea of we were right, just the people didn't do what they were told. We know best. And it's this, sometimes they might know best and the people might not do what they're told. But it's this assumption that, well, basically, like you said, we're God. We know best and you need to do what you're told. So here's his reasons why. Tweet number 2. "I was intending to introduce mandatory flu vaccinations in my final year as health secretary before I was moved to another role." Which I don't remember that. I used to watch I used to listen to the news at this time. I don't remember that ever coming out. I think that would have been quite a big thing to make at the time. And so that was certainly not headline news. But this is what he says in the third tweet. "I considered the issue carefully with all the sensitivities involved, but concluded it was non-negotiable that staff working with highly vulnerable people should do everything possible to protect them against asymptomatic disease. If that isn't do no harm, what is?" And at that point, my brain just explodes with all the things that bother me in the sentence. And there's this wonderful... "I considered the issue carefully with all the sensitivities involved, But it's non-negotiable. My conclusion is non-negotiable. I've thought about all these nuanced positions that people have had for many years. Doctors disagree, but I've considered it, and my decision is non-negotiable. And this is what Sajid Javid did when he was when he got into that conversation with that doctor, Steve Jones, I think his name. James, yeah. Maybe. Yeah, Steve James. Who I thought has done a wonderful job.
Yeah. In the hospital.
They were in the hospital. Yeah. Sajid Javid was interviewing these nurses who looked massively uncomfortable. I can't say whether they were, but they looked massively uncomfortable. What do you think about this policy?
They looked they just didn't want to be there.
They're on camera.
Yeah.
And there's the Secretary of State for Health asking them a very loaded question on camera. I thought for a start.
I think it's a good job I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I might have done something stupid.
And he conducted himself so well. He was so calm and clear and rational. And he gave a very brief summary of his position. Yeah. And Sajid Javid said, well, I can see, he's still like, I respect that opinion. It's like, no, you don't. Yeah. You do not respect that opinion because you've heard it and you're deliberately forcing people who have that opinion to either lose their jobs or go against their consciences. And it's the same thing here. It's like, I consider the issue carefully and listen to all the sensitivities, but it's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Like, it's an absolute no-brainer. It's obviously not been a no-brainer until Jeremy Hunt. But Jeremy Hunt is the first guy, and good on him. What would we do without him as Health Secretary? I mean, how did we get through this without him? Good job we had Matt Hancock as a backup. And just, you need a certain level of self-confidence to be a politician, but there's also a certain level of arrogance here. And it's this, to me, it feels like it's starting to encroach on this aggrandizement to godness. It's like, I know best and I'm in a position to act in a conclusive way on what I know best. Now, there are things, and let's not pretend there aren't, that we would want politicians to act conclusively and say, we know what is right and we're going to do it. So we would want things like murder, theft, which are recognised to be recognised as wrong and the government take action against it. But the fact that they feel free to bring all of this stuff in, which I actually don't think is in their realm of authority to start with, and then to be so overbearing with it, it's very problematic. And so here we go again with the fourth tweet. So I supported the government when they announced this, the mandatory vaccinations, and they won the argument. Most NHS leaders say this was right, but they needed the government to take a lead. They worked so hard to deliver it, but having marched people to the top of the hill, we now have the worst of all worlds. So the worst of all worlds is not, there are some people that are not vaccinated. This is the worst of all worlds. Who will now believe the government next time it tries to do the right thing? That's the worst possible thing that can ever happen, is that you might not believe the government when it's doing the right thing, because they are doing the right thing. You don't get to question that. They are doing the right thing. They know what the right thing is. What happens if we get a more dangerous variant than Omicron? Staff who reluctantly got jabbed to keep their job will feel cheated, and staff who held out will feel vindicated that the government can't be trusted. Well, I fully agree with the last bit. And almost every day, certainly a couple of times a week, I've bumped into, I don't even see that many people, bumped into nurses. I went to the hospital the other day, chatting to a couple of nurses there. I keep coming across people who took the vaccine, who didn't want to keep their jobs. And they do feel cheated. They really do. But the problem isn't, according to Jeremy Hunt, that they were cheated. It's that because the government have backed down, they've now lost the fact that people might resist them again in the future, when it's even more important that we believe that they're right. And that we could go. He did more tweets, but I think that's all we got on the screen. It really bothers me. The dragging in of anything that they think they can speak with absolute authority on. Things that are not within their God-given realm of responsibility, and to go so hard on it is very troubling. Yeah. And it calls for, I think in light of the Chalcedon thing, it calls for a recognition of our limits. we often talk about freedom, and you said that this doctrine led to freedom, but it leads to freedom by other people knowing their limits. And this is really important. When we say we believe in and we value freedom, we don't mean lawlessness. We mean genuine freedom in the areas where someone else shouldn't be controlling you and dictating to you. And they have limits. And so this is very bothering, because without a standard like the Bible, your freedoms are determined by these people.
It's freedom, but it's also a lot of responsibility. So we're saying, well, I think at least, that we should have, freedom from these structures, but healthcare, for me and my family, is my responsibility as a father and husband, and I should pay for that. So I'm saying, there are certain areas which you think, well, the government shouldn't be doing that, which means I have to take responsibility for it.
Yeah. And
so people don't want the responsibility. They're like, oh, you take it. Yeah. Well, they'll take charge of it for you. Maybe like educating your children. They'll do it for you. Well, it's my responsibility. It's our responsibility to educate our children. And if we give that up, it's not easily. Nothing is easily taken back.
No.
Freedom isn't free.
Yeah.
I think is the saying. It's very, very common. So there's a lot said there.
Yeah, and a lot more that could be said, because you sparked off a couple of little bits there, health, education, which I think are really important. But it's probably a reasonable place to tie that up.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll finish there, and once again, if you've got any questions, like what's our dog barking at, give us a like, drop a like, hit subscribe, leave some questions down in the comments. What do you think? Should Boris resign? Leave us a comment down below, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.